There is a silent moment that comes before every real transformation. It does not arrive with applause or certainty. It arrives with tension, confusion, and a strange inner pressure you cannot explain. Most people mistake this moment for failure, for being lost, for falling behind. But this is often the threshold, the psychological doorway between who you were and who you are becoming. Right before your life changes, your whole identity begins to feel uncomfortable. Habits that once felt safe now feel restrictive. Conversations feel shallow. Distractions lose their flavor. You begin to sense that continuing the same way is more painful than stepping into the unknown. This is not collapse. This is inner evolution announcing itself. In this stage, your mind may become noisy. Doubts grow louder because the familiar self is trying to survive. It whispers that you should turn back. Stay small, remain predictable. Fear becomes persuasive, uses logic, memory, and imagined outcomes to convince you that movement is danger. But fear at this point is not a stop sign. It is a signal that you are approaching psychological territory you have never mastered before. You may also feel alone in this moment. Not because no one exists around you, but because inner change is always solitary work. No one else can cross your internal threshold for you. Advice can guide, but decision transforms. Responsibility becomes unavoidable. You are no longer able to blame circumstances, people, or timing. You see clearly the next step is yours. There is often grief here too, grief for the version of you that must end. Even unhealthy identities feel familiar, and the psyche resists their death. But every higher order of self requires the sacrifice of a lower one. Growth is not addition, it is replacement. Right before change, your perception sharpens. You begin noticing patterns, your avoidance, your excuses, your hidden strengths, your unused courage. Awareness intensifies before action reorganizes. Insight comes before structure. This is why discomfort increases. You are seeing clearly, but have not yet moved fully. Do not rush this moment. Stand inside it consciously. This pressure is forging psychological muscle. This uncertainty is reorganizing your values. This friction is building internal authority. When you finally move, it will not be impulsive. It will be aligned. The moment before your life changes forever does not feel like victory. It feels like truth. And truth is the most powerful turning point a human being can face. Real transformation rarely begins with applause, recognition, or visible achievement. It begins in the private interior of a person where something no longer fits. A restlessness appears that cannot be solved by distraction or comfort. The routines that once provided stability begin to feel mechanical, even suffocating. This discomfort is often misunderstood because people are trained to interpret unease as a problem to eliminate rather than a signal to investigate. Yet inner friction is frequently the first movement of psychological growth, the stirring of a deeper structure trying to reorganize itself. External success signals are seductive because they are measurable and socially reinforced. Titles, money, praise, and status create the illusion of progress. But a person can accumulate all of these and still feel internally divided. When transformation is genuine, it does not start with what the world confirms. It starts with what the inner voice refuses to ignore. A subtle tension builds between the lived life and the unlived potential. You begin to notice how often you betray your own values for approval, how often you perform instead of act, comply instead of choose. This recognition is uncomfortable because it disrupts the story you have been telling yourself about who you are. Inner discomfort has a specific quality. It persists. Entertainment cannot silence it for long. Busy schedules cannot bury it. Even pleasure feels thinner when this signal is active. It is the psyche withdrawing its cooperation from the false arrangement you have constructed. What once felt acceptable now feels dishonest. This is not weakness. It is the strengthening of perception. You are beginning to see your misalignment clearly. Many people turn away at this stage. They rush to numb the tension with impulsive decisions, new distractions, or borrowed ambition. But avoidance delays development. Discomfort is not asking for escape. It is asking for attention. When you stay present with it, you begin to decode its message. It points toward undeveloped courage, neglected creativity, unspoken truth, or necessary boundaries. It exposes where adaptation has gone too far and authenticity has gone too quiet. There is also a stripping effect in this phase. False motivations lose their energy. Goals you pursued for comparison or validation start to feel empty. This can create temporary confusion because the old drivers are fading while the deeper ones are not yet fully formed. The person may feel directionless when in reality they are between identities, The ground is shifting from external pressure to internal authority. Discomfort is a forge. It generates heat that softens rigid self-concepts so they can be reshaped. Without this heat, personality remains fixed and defensive. With it, flexibility and depth become possible. If you listen closely, discomfort is not merely pain, it is instruction. It tells you where growth is required, where truth has been postponed, where strength is trying to emerge. Transformation begins the moment you stop asking how to feel comfortable again and start asking what this discomfort is trying to make you become. Fear often grows strongest at the precise moment a person approaches genuine psychological growth. It does not appear randomly, nor is it always a warning of danger. Many times it is a boundary signal, an internal alarm that activates when you are about to move beyond your current self-definition. The mind prefers the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting, because predictability feels like safety. Growth, by contrast, introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is interpreted by the nervous system as risk. As a result, the closer you come to meaningful change, the louder fear becomes. This intensification happens because psychological growth requires identity expansion. You are not merely changing an action, you are changing who acts. Old patterns, roles, and defenses begin to lose their control, and the psyche reacts as if something essential is being threatened. Fear steps forward like a guardian of the status quo. It produces catastrophic predictions, exaggerated consequences, and vivid memories of past failures. Its purpose is not intelligence but preservation. It tries to keep your internal structure stable, even if that structure is outdated. Right before growth, perception widens. You begin to see new possibilities for behavior, truth, and responsibility. With expanded awareness comes expanded choice, and choice creates pressure. If you see more clearly, you can no longer pretend ignorance. Fear rises here because clarity removes excuses. You sense that if you step forward, you will have to live differently, speak more honestly, and accept greater responsibility for outcomes. The weight of that realization can feel intimidating, and fear translates that weight into hesitation. There is also a biological layer. The body encodes past experiences of embarrassment, rejection, and failure. When a new opportunity resembles an old wound, even symbolically, the body reacts before reason does. Your heart rate increases, muscles tense, and imagination fills with worst-case scenarios. Yet these reactions often occur not because the present moment is dangerous, but because it is unfamiliar. The system confuses novelty with threat. Growth, almost by definition, requires entering territory where you have no proof of mastery yet. Fear at the threshold is often accompanied by rationalization. The mind produces respectable excuses to retreat. The timing is wrong, preparation is incomplete, conditions are imperfect. These explanations feel logical, which makes them persuasive. But if examined closely, they usually mask a deeper resistance, the reluctance to outgrow the current identity. Comfort argues like a lawyer, growth speaks more quietly. When understood properly, fear becomes diagnostic information. Instead of asking how to eliminate it, you can ask what boundary it is protecting. Often it guards undeveloped strength. The task is not to destroy fear, but to walk with it consciously. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important than remaining unchanged. At the edge of psychological development, fear does not mean stop. It means you are near a door you have never opened. It marks the line between repetition and transformation, between inherited limits and chosen expansion. The intensity you feel is proportional not to the danger ahead, but to the size of the self you are about to become. Identity change is often misunderstood as a process of addition, adding new routines, new skills, new strategies, new habits. While these elements are useful, they are not sufficient. True identity change is subtractive before it is additive. It requires releasing the structure of the former self, the assumptions, emotional reactions, roles, and self-descriptions that once felt permanent. Without this release, new habits sit on top of an old psychological foundation and eventually collapse under its weight. The former self is not only made of behaviors, it is made of interpretations. It is the way you explain your past, justify your limits, and predict your future. It is the internal narrative that says, this is just how I am, or people like me don't do that, or I always end up here. These statements appear factual but function as identity anchors. When you try to build new habits without challenging these anchors, the old identity quietly pulls your behavior back into alignment with its story. The result is inconsistency and frustration, not transformation. Letting go is difficult because identity provides psychological continuity. Even unhealthy patterns feel stabilizing when they are familiar. A person may complain about their habits yet unconsciously defend them because those habits confirm a known self-image. To release them feels like stepping into internal emptiness. There is often a period where you no longer fully recognize your old motivations, but your new ones are not yet stable. This in-between state can feel disorienting, and many retreat simply to regain a sense of psychological solidity. There is also grief involved in identity change. The former self carried adaptations that once served a purpose. Certain defenses protected you. Certain roles earned you belonging. Certain limitations kept you safe from risk. Acknowledging this creates respect for what must now be released. Without respect, letting go turns into self-rejection, which fractures growth. With respect, it becomes conscious retirement of outdated strategies. You are not destroying your past self, you are updating your operating structure. New habits succeed when they are expressions of a new self-concept, not tools to manufacture one artificially. When identity shifts, behavior follows with less friction. A person who sees themselves as honest does not rely on a habit checklist to tell the truth. A person who sees themselves as disciplined does not negotiate with every alarm clock. The action flows from identification. This is why deep change focuses on self-definition first and behavioral technique second. Letting go also requires removing hidden rewards attached to the old identity. Every pattern persists because it pays something: attention, sympathy, control, avoidance of responsibility. When you identify these rewards, you face a harder truth. Growth will cost you certain comforts. You may lose familiar excuses, familiar approval, familiar emotional patterns. The trade is real. Identity evolution is an exchange, not an upgrade with no surrender. As the former self loosens, choice becomes more visible. Reactions that once felt automatic begin to feel optional. Space appears between impulse and action. In that space, a different person can act not because a new habit was added, but because an old identity no longer commands the behavior. The true turning point in a person's life is rarely public and never transferable. It happens in the private interior, where excuses lose their credibility and choice becomes unavoidable. People often wait for rescue in subtle ways: the right mentor, the perfect plan, the support environment, the motivating crisis. While help and guidance have value, the decisive movement cannot be delegated. Responsibility is the lever that moves psychological change, and that lever must be pulled from within. No one can assume it on your behalf. Outsourcing responsibility is attractive because it reduces immediate pressure. If circumstances are blamed, then action can be postponed. If other people are assigned control, then passivity feels justified. The mind constructs elaborate arguments to support this arrangement. The timing is wrong, the system is unfair, the resources are insufficient, the support is missing. Some of these claims may contain truth, but when they become total explanations, they turn into barriers. They shift focus outward and freeze inner agency. A personal turning point begins when the direction of explanation reverses. Instead of asking, who or what is preventing me, the question becomes, where am I permitting this to continue? This is not self-blame. It is self-positioning. It recognizes that while not everything is controllable, response always is. The moment you accept ownership of response, your psychological posture changes from spectator to participant. Energy that was previously spent on resentment becomes available for construction. This shift is uncomfortable because responsibility removes the protective layer of complaint. Complaint allows emotional release without structural change. Responsibility demands adjustment. It forces you to examine habits you defend, patterns you repeat, and truths you avoid. It exposes the quiet agreements you make with your own avoidance. Many people circle growth for years because they prefer analysis and discussion to ownership and execution. The turning point interrupts that cycle. Personal responsibility also clarifies influence. When you claim what is yours to change, you simultaneously stop trying to control what is not. This creates sharper boundaries in thought and action. You invest effort where it produces movement instead of scattering it across frustration. The psyche becomes more ordered because authority is no longer projected outward. Internal command replaces external dependency. There is a solitude to this moment. Even in the presence of supporters, the decision feels singular. Others can encourage, warn, or inspire, but they cannot decide for you without weakening the transformation. Borrowed decisions produce borrowed commitment, and borrowed commitment collapses under stress. When the choice is owned, endurance increases because the action is self-authored. Effort becomes an expression of identity rather than compliance. Responsibility is often misunderstood as burden, yet psychologically it functions more like alignment. It connects intention with behavior and restores a sense of authorship. Helplessness fragments the personality. Responsibility integrates it. When you accept that your next step belongs to you, hesitation and clarity appear together. You feel the weight and the power at the same time. The external world may remain complex and imperfect, but your role within it becomes defined by participation rather than reaction. That definition marks the inner pivot where direction stops being assigned and starts being chosen. Awareness and insight emerge before any meaningful reorganization of outer life takes place. External change that lasts is rarely impulsive. It is preceded by a period of inner seeing. This seeing is not merely intellectual understanding, but psychological recognition. The moment when patterns, motives, and consequences become visible without distortion. Before routines shift and decisions solidify, perception sharpens. You begin to notice what you previously ignored, the repeated compromises, the emotional triggers, the silent resentments, the unused strengths. This heightened awareness is the blueprint stage of transformation. Many people try to reverse the order. They attempt to change their environment, schedule, or relationships first, hoping clarity will follow action. Sometimes action can produce insight, but when reorganization is not guided by awareness, it becomes chaotic rather than constructive. The person changes direction repeatedly, adopts methods without conviction, and abandons them under pressure. Without insight, change is imitation. With insight, change is alignment. Insight carries a disruptive quality because it rearranges interpretation. Events that once seemed purely external reveal internal participation. You recognize how your reactions contribute to outcomes, how your expectations shape perception, how your avoidance sustains difficulty. This recognition can feel uncomfortable because it dissolves simple narratives of blame or innocence. Yet this discomfort is instructive. It replaces emotional storytelling with structural understanding. During this phase, observation increases while immediate action may temporarily slow. This pause is not weakness, it is psychological mapping. The mind and emotions are recalibrating their coordinates. You are learning to distinguish impulse from value, fear from intuition, habit from choice. Subtle distinctions become clearer. You detect the difference between what is urgent and what is important, between what is loud and what is true. Such distinctions are necessary before durable external restructuring can occur. Awareness also reveals contradiction. You may discover that stated goals conflict with daily behavior, or that declared values clash with practice priorities. These contradictions were always present, but insight illuminates them. Illumination creates tension because inconsistency becomes conscious. That tension generates pressure for reorganization. Without awareness, inconsistency can persist indefinitely. With awareness, it becomes psychologically unstable. There is often a period where insight outpaces execution. You see what must change, but have not yet built the strength or strategy to change it. This gap can feel frustrating, yet it serves a purpose. It allows emotional acceptance to catch up with intellectual recognition. Premature action without emotional integration leads to relapse. Gradual integration builds endurance. As awareness deepens, language changes internally. Instead of global judgments, you form specific observations. Instead of everything is wrong, you identify precise misalignments. Specificity enables targeted change. Vague dissatisfaction produces dramatic but misdirected moves. Precise insight produces measured restructuring. External life reorganization, new boundaries, new commitments, new behaviors, becomes more stable when it grows out of sustained awareness. Decisions made from insight require less external enforcement because they are internally justified. Motivation becomes less dependent on mood and more connected to understanding. When perception has been refined, action is no longer a reaction to discomfort alone, but a deliberate expression of clarity. The final moment before change rarely feels triumphant. It does not arrive wrapped in certainty, nor does it carry the reassurance of applause. Instead, it feels like tension drawn tight across the mind and body, a quiet pressure that signals something irreversible is near. There is a stillness in it, but not a comfortable one. It is the stillness before a decision that cannot be undone, before a step that will alter the internal structure from which you operate. In this moment, doubt and clarity coexist. Certainty is often romanticized as the signal to move. People imagine that when the time is right, confidence will flood in and remove hesitation. But profound change does not eliminate fear, it clarifies necessity. You may not feel fully ready, but you feel fully aware. The arguments for staying the same begin to weaken, not because they disappear, but because they no longer convince you. The familiar life you have constructed feels complete in a way that signals its ending. You recognize its limits with a kind of sober honesty. Tension arises because two identities are present at once. The old self still seeks security, predictability, and validation. The emerging self seeks alignment, responsibility, and expansion. These two orientations pull in opposite directions, creating internal strain. This strain is not confusion, it is compression. Like a structure under pressure, you are being forced to choose which design will hold your future weight. The body feels this choice as tightness, restlessness, even fatigue. Mind replays consequences in vivid detail. Everything feels amplified. Truth surfaces in this amplified state. You see without decoration. Excuses lose their emotional protection. You recognize where you have delayed, where you have compromised, where you have hidden from necessary confrontation. There is no dramatic soundtrack in this realization. Only a sober acknowledgement that continuing unchanged would now be an act of self-betrayal. This is why applause is absent. External approval becomes secondary when internal alignment is at stake. The absence of applause can feel isolating. No one may understand the weight of the decision you are about to make. From the outside, nothing dramatic is visible. Internally, however, a structural shift is underway. You are reorganizing your loyalties, shifting them from comfort to integrity, from avoidance to participation. This reorganization is quiet but powerful. It does not require witnesses to be valid. In this final moment, action feels both inevitable and voluntary. You sense that you could retreat, but you know retreat would cost more than movement. The tension becomes instructive rather than paralyzing. It signals that the decision matters. If it were insignificant, there would be no strain. The pressure confirms the scale of transformation. When you move from this place, it is not because you are certain of the outcome. It is because you are certain of the necessity. That distinction changes everything. The step forward is taken not in celebration, but in alignment with a truth that has become too clear to ignore. And so, if you find yourself standing in that tight, quiet moment where the pressure is real, the excuses are fading, and the truth is unmistakable, understand what it is. Do not mislabel it as failure or fear alone. It is the doorway. It is the line between the life directed by habit and the life directed by conscious choice. Breathe there. Stand there fully, then step, not because it is comfortable, but because it is true. That is how a new life begins, not with noise, but with an honest decision you refuse to betray.